Hello, listeners. Welcome to Ideas, Innovative Dialogues in Educational Approaches and Scholarship podcast series in the Research Hub at the Faculty of Education, Simon Fraser University. My name is Shaila and I'm your host. I would like to acknowledge that all Ideas podcasts are recorded at Simon Fraser University, whose three campuses are located on the unceded traditional territories of the Coast Salish peoples of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Coquitlam nations. Listeners, we are excited to present our Spring 2025 episodes to you, featuring a range of scholars and their amazing work. For our second episode of the year, we have Natacha Roudeix with us today. Natacha Roudeix holds a joint PhD from Simon Fraser University, Canada, and INALCO, France. Currently a teacher at the Francophone School Board at British Columbia, her profession has allowed her to teach in Nunavik with the Inuit and in Nepal, Sri Lanka, and Vancouver. Her research interests are in plurilingualism, language representations, and indigeneity. In a process of contributing to the reconciliation process, she is also working on the inclusion of Indigenous perspectives in her practices as a researcher and a teacher. Her bio in French is shared on our webpage. Hello, Natacha. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Sheila.
It's great to have you here today. Natacha, we know you are doing such important work. But before getting into details about your research, we'd like to know more about you. So could you tell us something about yourself?
Natacha Roudeix. Je m'appelle Natacha. My name is Natacha. Unika sivunga, I will tell you a story. Aulayi vunga. I remember my Eskimo Playmobiles, my research about the Inuit when I was 8 years old, the igloos on my pencil on the paper while I was drawing their clothes. I remember this fascination on if one day I was going to live with them. Impossible? Well, nothing is impossible. I did it. I went there, I lived, and I built part of my personal and professional identity in the North. Me, little French girl, but how do you get from France to Nunavik? Well, maybe I was meant to go there. Maybe I was an anthropologist in another life. All I know is that I started to really write on a regular basis and reflect on who I am in this world up north. I eventually did my master's degree based on these reflections. But many questions still remain. Who are they? What is so different between the Inuit and myself? Why do we call them Inuit? Because they speak Inuktitut? Because they were born in Nunavik? Because they share things in common? What defines one culture from another? Education, the language we speak? Does globalization have an impact on the government in all this? Who am I to put a diagnostic on a society? Maybe, and even surely no one. Another inhabitant in this earth, a citizen, and a hybrid. Me, sometimes Natacha, daughter of a single-parent mother, Nama, who wanders in my big little world, and Natasa, the eager Inuk, who makes her pualuk, her mittens, on her sealskin kamik boots. And hybrid trying to adapt and understand the world I live in. An apprentice researcher who tries to make the world a better place, one drop at a time, like a hummingbird. I know this PhD won't change the world, but maybe it will change mine. That was part of a journal reflection I did. So that's how I think it's the best way to describe myself.
Thank you so much, Natacha. This was moving and this is so personal. I really appreciate you introducing yourself to us this way, through a story. Next, I would like to ask you about your thesis. So your PhD thesis title is about a journey of gatherings with members of an Inuit community as mentioned in your thesis abstract. So can you tell us more about your research? And I know you have already kind of touched on how you became interested living in Nunavut, but can you also please tell us how did you become interested in this research area?
So this project is part of an ethno-social-linguistic and participatory research in a complex context where Inuktitut, French and English coexist. This doctoral research focuses on linguistic and identity practices, plurilingualism, linguistic policies, and language revitalization. It takes place in Inuit Nunangat, in Nunavik, in Kuujjuaq, with plurilingual Inuit and with a colonial history. So this thesis focuses on the representations of the Inuit of Nunavik, more specifically in Kuujjuaq, regarding the languages they speak, on the complex dynamics between Inuktitut, English, and French. It is part of a perspective of decolonization of knowledge and intent to amplify the voices of the Inuit people who participate in the research. This allows us to better understand very diverse and fluid linguistic practices, but also the issues of revitalization of Inuktitut in a sensitive historical and societal context, which is the reconciliation with Indigenous people in Canada. So I question with them, with the participants of the research, the notion of representation. And they chose to name them Atingwak, which means images. They also wanted to change the term languages by Uhausit, which is the term to say languages in Inuktitut. Identities, they chose Kinonirk, culture, Ilokosirk, and land, which is Nuna. So I question all these terms with them during the thesis. Yeah, that's about it.
Thank you so much. So that actually leads to my next question. Your research is fascinating, and you have spent so many years in Nunavik in northern Quebec, and you have taught there in the Inuit community and built relationship with the Inuit people, like formed relationship with them. So how was your experience? And I'd also like to ask you how important it is to have a relationship with the community, especially when you do research with the Indigenous peoples.
Okay, to carry out this important work, I spent several months teaching in the local school and sharing the daily life of an isolated Inuit community, which is Kuujjuaq, in which I had previously lived and taught for several years. So it wasn't my first time going there. My first year there were life-changing experience where I discovered a plurilingual word I didn't know before because I was coming from France and where I only knew French at that time. People were mixing the languages and they were all understanding each other anyway. So that was for me like a fabulous environment. It changed me as a person and as a teacher. So for my thesis, I questioned with the ideas of revitalization, decolonization, and reconciliation, my posture as a researcher in an Indigenous environment, which I wish to be relational and innovative, to build the capacity of Indigenous communities to participate in research as equal collaborators with the freedom to bring their knowledge, values, research principle, and names to project. It is important to revisit the notions of research and researcher. I do not qualify myself as a researcher, but rather as a become guest, traveler, nomad, the one who walks, who listens, and who do with the Inuit. Indeed, I make it a point of honor to give voice to the Inuit who call themselves unikatuartit with instead of participant. That's so like I always used their term in Inuktitut. But who I am to do research in Inuit communities, even though I'm not Inuk. So from an historical standpoint, indigenous research has often been conducted by non-indigenous like me using a helicopter approach. In fact, researchers went back and forth to indigenous communities to collect their data without understanding or considering indigenous people well-being, and often without ever going back. And lots of participants told me about that. So in the north, Halunat, that's the white people. So the Halunat researchers are called Nirlit, which is the geese, because like geese, they come in the spring and leave in the fall. This has contributed to indigenous skepticism and research fatigue in general. In Nunavik, the researcher is referred also as a Arpiakrurk, or the one who asks questions, knowing that this is not well seen among the Inuit. Today, Indigenous people not only want to be consulted in research processes, but also want to actively participate and take greater control over the research that takes place within their communities. Thus, under increased pressure for Indigenous organizations and communities, research involving Indigenous people have gradually shifted from research about Indigenous people to research by and with them. And it's really important for me, like the with them. As Linda Smith stated, the word itself, research, is probably one of the dirtiest words in Indigenous words vocabulary. This term is not to be taken lightly and is seen as a dirty word, questioning as a dirty word that we question and choose carefully with the participant, because some words do not exist in Inuktitut. My wish is to start from Inuit knowledge and ways of knowing. So because I taught there before, I was a visitor and become guest traveler nomadic. So from 2001 to 2005, I was Natacha, a French woman who was studying to become a teacher in northern Quebec. Then I traveled to Nepal and I became Nama. And after that, I went to Nunavik and I became Natasa, a French as a second language teacher, or Iliniatitsi in Inuktitut. Some kindergartner children could not say my name first, so they started to call me Matasa. So some teacher, that's how they call me too now. So in Kuujjuaq, I was no longer the French woman, but a Halunak, which is white people in an Inuk territory. So I started to be a visitor, and then knowing the people, they knew me. I did activities with them, so I became suddenly become guest. And then they knew I like to travel, so they started to tell me that I was a traveler and nomadic also. So that's how, I think it's really important to have connection with the people to be able to do the research. And this research is based on a walking and multisensory approach of ethnography by addressing the multisensory dimension of knowledge and practices, which enters into the Indigenous epistemology. Indeed, for Indigenous people, knowledge is also approached through the senses and the intuition, and includes cognitive knowing as well as experiential understanding, sensory, emotional, and spiritual knowing, intuition, dreams, and cultural knowing. It is not a question of looking at others and distancing myself from the study, but a question of reflecting on who I am in this research, on what I experience, on what I hear for the exchange and experience with participants and the community. Instead of interviewer, traveler, I consider myself as become guest traveler nomad. I'm the one who look around, the one who observes, I'm the one who live and make friends with the Inuit, the one who walks, Pisuti, and the one who do dog sledding, Rimut. I'm the one who explores the world around me. I'm the one who move. Crashwell in 2012 uses the concept of waiting, stillness, stuckness. Garbert in 2013 talks about anchoring. The fact of sitting down allows you to anchor yourself in a boat to keep your feet on the ground, knowing that it is always possible to live for new horizons. I am also the one who contemplates, the one who stops, the one who remains motionless, like the Inuk hunter waiting for the seal to come out on his breathing walls, the one who takes a break, and the one who sits down to contemplate and reflect. During these moments of alterity, it is important to learn how to listen in order to decenter yourself from your own standards. I am an actor in this journey by listening to stories, participating in them, and listening to them. So I'm like in two-eyed seeing research, the one who listens, Nalasuk, in Inuktitut, the one who listens to stories, or Nalasu Unikatuni. During this journey, I was led to listen to life stories, language biographies, and to live with an Inuk community by participating in various cultural and social activities. I was a become guest traveler nomad in an Inuk territory. I am, and I will still remain a Halunat, a white person, who transport, in spite of myself, a colonial context at the heart of a so-called scientific fieldwork. Throughout this journey, I had no choice to deal with the colonial history. However, for my practices, my epistemological and ontological posture, I try to shift from an academic vocabulary to Inuit words to qualify myself. I therefore seek to move away from this colonial concept. This is how I chose to weigh my words by favoring words in Inuktitut rather than words in French or English. For example, because words carry their sounds and carry the meaning. The goal of the doctoral student is to push back and change the frontier of research. He has the choice of his research and the way in which he will conduct it. Reflexivity makes it possible to move the lines already written and to lead us towards less explored paths. I work towards Tukisimainirk, developing some understanding, being open-minded to understand and make sense with the risk of misinterpretations, feelings of discomfort, apprehension, and uncertainty. Perhaps it is necessary to be willing to be uncomfortable in order to work for understanding myself in relation to Inuit. So I always wanted to participate to the activities, and that's how I made connection with the people from there, and that's how I tried to do my research.
That's wonderful, Natasha. Thanks so much for sharing your transforming journey with us. And I really like what you said, that maybe we need to be uncomfortable with who we are as we figure out what we want to do. I also like what you said, that the Inuit peoples now would like to have a control of the dominant narrative about them, so that they are the one who can create the narrative about themselves, not somebody else who is going to create it about them, but it's rather creating for them by themselves. You used an interesting term, helicopter approach. Though you have already shared how you, like you mentioned relational accountability, you also shared how you did your research. But I was wondering if you have anything more to add to what kind of, given the context of your research and given your onto and epistemological orientation, what kind of research approach or methodology you adopted for your fieldwork or research?
Thank you for your insight. Yes, I talked about like I've already talked a little bit about it, but it's I used a hilaud. A hilaud is a tambour in French, so it's a drum. It's an Inuit drum. I don't know if you can picture it, but you can still look for it on the internet, I'm sure. So it's a I picture my research in with the hilaud, which you can find the ontology, the epistemology, the axiology, and the methodology of my research, which is all like it's all in one. It's in circle and it's all related. So it's a journey of a crossroad between indigenous and non-indigenous approaches. It's a qualitative, relational, and participatory journey inspired by ethno-sociolinguistic, using narratives, visual, and sensitive approach on methodologies. I use also the two icing and the multiple icing of Kelly, Vicky Kelly from SFU, to cross the perspective of Indigenous and non-Indigenous researchers, as well as my own experiences. So I was questioning the connection to nature and place, as well as the place of visual and sensitive methodologies, particularly in an Indigenous environment and from an Indigenous perspective. Kuujjuq said from an Inuk point of view. So I used the metaphor of travel, of the journey, of movement, of path, of traces, to instead of research. It's for me it's a journey, and I use also the metaphor of walking. So walking must be understood both as action and as a metaphor that allows us to move together. Walking allows us to retrace our steps, to walk in the footsteps of others, to walk faster, slower, to live experimentally, informally. Walking itself offers a metaphor for understanding the physical practices of doing this form of research, to be differently in research. The walk here has value both as a provocation to quest and has a figurative lens of conceptualizing the ethnographic encounter as a crossing. So what I used also, my corpus was like I call it complex because I had many tools. So I used like comprehensive interviews, linguistic biographies. I also use ethnophotography, photo voice with culture box, what we call culture box, with the participant had to bring several objects to talk about it. And it was a piece for them to express their life. I use also the observation, and I had a journal and took note during all the time of the research, of the data collection. Yeah.
Thank you so much. That's wonderful. We are almost at the end of the podcast. So my last question for you is, your research is fascinating. I'd like to understand, what is the significance of your research in a settler colonial state like Canada, with a backdrop of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission?
Yeah, thank you for that question. My life in the North allowed me to follow my path, to trace my journey, and to live my dreams. It was with the Inuit that I learned to wander in the village and to roam around the world. I went on an adventure, like travel with my backpack like a turtle. I let myself to be surprised by my surroundings. Then I let myself be carried by the current again to meet other people. This is how I wish to continue to wander, like the nomadic Inuit who traveled to find places where food was more abundant. Understanding this thesis with the traveler vision is a good way to establish a link between the indigenous culture of the Inuit and the nomadic status. The traveler wanders, listens, exchanges, and changes with the participants. The traveler has also the choice to leave and to rediscover. He also maintains links with people. This is a journey that gradually transforms the traveler over time and over gatherings. I'm not Inuk, and I feel blessed to have been welcomed by some Inuit. I have and still am today a Halonak in an Inuk territory who went from visitor to one who knocked at the door before entering a house to a become guest, the one who is welcome to have tea or dinner without knocking at the door. I continue to learn and live the relationship to the territory, to time, to space. I learn to move in my relationship to others, to myself, and to culture on this journey, as I like to call it. A journey that allowed me to transform myself, to listen and to share and do with the Inuit. I made editorial choices during the thesis. First one, I made the choice to not translate certain words in Inuktitut using English or French because I wanted to preserve what was expressed in the original language. I also made the choice of writing under erasure to highlight the inherently colonial dimension of certain academic terms. So in my thesis, I wrote under erasure research and researcher. It's all like written in under erasure. I made the choice of an ethnological and intercultural approach by immersion, with the major concern of not holding a speech about, but on the contrary, a speech with the people of the community, in order to try to make readers better understand how these people live, say, and think about the world, their languages, and their lives. It is about reporting on Indigenous knowledge without reducing it to being only the object of Western scholarly knowledge. So I mobilized, like I said, the lexicon of Inuktitut on the ways of speaking in Inuktitut for my thesis with multiple equivalent in French because I couldn't find the perfect term, and in English. So to not reduce the participant remarks by crushing or distorting their remarks. Knowing that the university is often described by many Indigenous authors as a place of perpetuation of colonial violence, I made the choice to clearly position myself in solidarity with Inuit communities. So I approach a sensitive subject by questioning colonial representation and truly giving the participant a voice in the thesis. I also highlight, along with the participant, the necessity to rethink the notion of plurilingualism by taking into account territoriality, corporality, temporality, sensitivity, survival, and continuity of languages. Making the result for, at the end of the thesis, I took all all their voices and I make a video, and that's how I gave back to the participant and to the community. So making the results for the movie with the voices of the participants accessible to the community was for me something really important also, because all the data I have are not mine. It's theirs. I'm just there to write, and now it's their choice to do whatever they want with the data I collected. So thank you.
Wonderful. This is amazing work, and I really appreciate your standpoint and your view on data, on conducting research, on forming relationship with the people from the community who chose to participate in your research. Thank you so much for joining us today, Natacha, and good luck with your next endeavors.
Thanks a lot, Sheila.
Okay, listeners, I hope you'd agree that it was a very meaningful and insightful conversation today. Thanks for always supporting ideas. We'll be back next month with another scholar from our community. Stay tuned. Thank you all.